Hello, my name is Sarrah Christensen. I'm an evolutionary astrologer, and you can find me at my website, wednesdayjustview.com. And today I'm going to be presenting leadership in the chart. We're going to be exploring a few charts of leaders that kind of came to mind for me for this one. So let me share my screen and get to my slides. And it'll take me a minute to get them to slideshow. There we go. All right. Oops. There. Okay. So the first thought I had is, what do I think of about leadership? And I wanted to come up with some attributes that I thought were important to consider and what I would be looking at, so you kind of have an idea of how I would then pull that into the astrology. So the first thing I thought of is, of course, a strong leader would be able to communicate a vision, or has a vision, and also a mission. And part of that is also being able to communicate it. So it's kind of vision and the mission for it, and then communication. Additionally, having power or authority, and then ability to delegate and execute. Also integrity and influence, strategic insight, and also planning. And then, of course, lasting legacy. So whatever their vision and mission and whatever they created from that over the course of their lives, or when they kind of came into their leadership, having a lasting legacy. And of course, after I finished my slides, I thought of one more that might be included in here, is how they may manage their weaknesses. And that's not something that we would have a lot of visibility to, but it would be something maybe we could get insight if they were interviewed and they had called it out or something, and how they might work with that. I thought that would be another one, but I don't know if that one immediately would be available across all of them. But I think it would still be interesting. Okay? So these are the things that I'm going to be focusing on as I discuss the astrology. Okay, I'm going to click on that. There we go. Okay, so in the astrology, these are the things that I'm going to have to move this over. It's not. Hold on one second. I got to move that thing. Okay, these are the pieces of the astrology that I thought would bring a lot of insight into someone's potential for leadership, or how their leadership was going to look to us as either from the collective point of view, looking at them. So first off, I thought the nodal axis, since I'm in evolutionary astrology, of course I'm looking at that, and then the power of the nodal rulers in the chart relative to that. Position of the sun is important, I think, for a leader, and how it would progress through the chart, either towards an angle, either towards the ascendant or towards the midheaven, but also related to just the power planets, leadership, or action planets like Mars, the midheaven, as well as relation to the ruler and the power planets, such as Pluto and so forth. I also thought it was important to look at events of the life that stimulate the leadership call to action. And then Mercury and Neptune, kind of around speaking to their vision and or their mission, but also just how they every day would be able to communicate with a lot of people or individuals and partners and things like that. Engaging in relationships is a key part of being a leader. And so Venus, how Venus looks in the chart, houses she rules, as well as Mars for their action and what they do, and if they need to be brave as well. Sun, also part of the relationship piece. Mars and Saturn around strategy and their staying power to achieve what their mission is, or their influence. And of course, moon for emotional intelligence, but I also think we often look at charts of leaders for the moon as the people, like a mass of people related to that particular individual in power. So these are ones I was thinking of, and I am open to hearing other points of view from other people who want to share, but this is what I kind of framed it from for this talk. Hold on one second. There. Okay. I'm actually going to jump to Richard Branson's chart, but I just want to bring this up for a second because this is kind of my short list that I'm going to be going over because I have a lot of notes on each person. So I just want to let this play for the video for those who watch this later. I also may just put up this in a short document attached to the files in the group, so you can have it for looking at the video with this next to you when you look at it. So here's Richard Branson, in case you don't know, just a few images of him. I love the one when he's a younger man. Okay, so here's his chart. So looking at, excuse me, I gotta move this thing again. Looking at right out of the gate, I'm looking at his, I'm going to annotate this as I go along, but I'm going to have to back it up as I go, so bear with me. I'm going to draw on my chart. Okay, so right out of the gate, I see that he has Pluto rising in Leo, and it's trine, move that out of the way, and it's trine his midheaven that's in Aries. So it's like fire on the midheaven, and Leo, Pluto, very powerful in the first house, right next to the ascendant. That's the first thing I noticed about Richard's chart. The next thing I look at is the node. I looked at the nodes because, like, okay, where are the nodes? His north node is in Aries, and his south node is in Libra, across the 9th house and 3rd house axis. So whatever Richard decides to do in life, it's going to be a pioneer, or he's going to be highly active because he has a lot of fire energy, and it's working through his north node out of through the 9th. So in publishing, travel, formulations, those kinds of things, as well as the communications coming from his background. What was interesting about his Mars, where's the Mars? The Mars down here rules the north node. And I thought, well, what's going on with the Mars? Not only is it trine his south node ruler, and so I have a nice air trine here between his north node ruler and his south node ruler, and they're close to the south node. So it's like he's done something related to the communication sector before, and there's the opportunity to do more with it this time around. But I think looking at his Mars situation, even though it's in Libra, it's like he likes the competition just for the sake of the competition. I think one of his quotes that I liked, it says, "Take a chance. It's the best way to test yourself. Have fun and push boundaries." I thought that was kind of good, being with the North Node in Aries and in the 9th house. The Venus in Gemini also is important because it rules his values sector and his, not Venus, excuse me, Venus rules in, well, it doesn't rule the 10th, but it's inside the 10th, and it's ruling the South Node ruler, which is in the 3rd house, so it has a lot to do with communications, which is a big part of his later enterprises. I'm not going to go into all of the companies he started. He started over, he has, I lost count. There's so many, but he's definitely has about 60 right now, 60 companies worldwide. And I'll go into more detail on that in a minute. But I thought Venus is super important as well in his endeavors because it speaks to the relationships he has, but the Neptune expands it even more, even though it's widely trine by 10 degrees to that Venus. So this piece is kind of, it rules the south node, but it also rules his home, his 4th house, and it's intercepted in the 10th, which makes it kind of, some people say that's harder to get to, but I think it's in the 10th. So to me, it's maybe something around the value system, around the career. But moving forward, I wanted to look at Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of expansion, of course, and it's in the sign of Pisces. It's just tucked into his 8th house of other resources, the resources of other people, but also others' values, you know, expanding that. So if anybody invested in his companies, and being able to expand on that. Interesting, the moon is opposite that Venus, so there's a connection between his own identity and his presence in the world, but how he's involved on a detailed basis. And what I learned about Richard Branson, which is interesting about his leadership style, is when he starts a new enterprise, he will get heavily involved for the first like 4 months, he says. And then after that, after he's hired really great people, he leaves that to leaders that he's hired and gives them the autonomy and puts the trust in his people. So that was huge about how he kind of gets involved really close at first and then takes a step back. And which is interesting, it kind of reflects his sun in the Cancer of the 12th house, kind of being a behind the scenes power person, because even though he has a powerful persona and he has great influence broadly, what's interesting is how he deals with the people at a close level. He's a little bit more hands off after he gets them going in the direction he wants it to go. So that's how he instills his leadership style. That was interesting to find out. He also tends to take care of his employees. I have a quote somewhere in here. One moment, I have to find it because it's the best one. It's like the quote that he's known for. He said, "Clients do not come first, employees come first. If you take care of your employees, they will take care of the clients." So his relationship with his employees is really, rich with trust, but he understands kind of like he's not just a one-man show. Even though you'd think that would be with the Leo on the ascendant like that, he understands that he cannot do it without a great team with him. So that's important, and I kind of see that in his how's kind of working between his moon and his sun, because his moon rules the sun. It's kind of good. What else did I learn about Richard Branson, or Sir Richard Branson is his title. Neptune. Neptune is conjunct his Mars in the 3rd house of communications. So he has this ability to really reach a wide audience. He's known as the guy who will promote rather extravagantly. So he's made a name for that, especially in his early days. But he still does those kind of stunts and things to get attention for his brand. But he has really mastered the marketing and promotions to reach a wide audience as an entrepreneur. So he's created, like a fervent following, and that's kind of reflected in the Neptune in Libra there next to the Mars. It also speaks to his interest in water sports. But okay, the water element in his, I guess it would be his sun in Cancer, but I think it's also reflective of the Scorpio down in the 4th house, even though it's intercepted in that house. He's had like a sailing incident, like an accident and loss for his home during Hurricane Irma and fire to his house. So he's had some losses around the home. And that was his home on Necker Island in the British Virgin Islands. So going back to his North Node, related to being an entrepreneur and a leader, is he's a risk taker. and you can see that reflected in his experience, but all in his life. But it's really called out by his Mars as the ruler of his North Node in the 9th house, and that fire energy trining his ascendant as well, and the persona that he brings into his career and reputation is also there on the 10th house, because he's not just an entrepreneur. He does a lot of he's an adventurer. He's known to be an adventurer, risk taker, trying to break world records and things like that, and things he does, like the balloon around the world thing he attempted and things like that. Partners are important for the leadership. Interesting, his partners would have kind of the forward-thinking Aquarian type involved, but so the technology is important. He has a lot of businesses that run around the technology. I'd read through the list of his accomplishments, but they are pages and pages long. So, and so many of his businesses, as they went to their technology related, like Virgin Airlines, an airline, and that's where the Uranus in Cancer comes into play, and how he takes care of his customers through his employees and so forth. But a lot of his businesses are technology related and forward thinking. What else? I also wanted to note that his Uranus is a square his nodal axis and is part of his kind of evolution for himself. And so I think the relationships as it relates to this is part of the growth curve for his own evolution. Another thing I thought of for Richard Branson about leadership is, as when he was born, the sun was at 25 degrees in Cancer and would, by solar progression, move towards his ascendant. And I think it was by age 19 and a half, it would have reached his ascendant, and that was just short. He quit school as a young adult, around 16 years old or so, and then started his own businesses. The first two didn't work. They failed. One of them was Christmas trees, and there was something else. But the third one, I think, took off. It was a magazine called Student. But it was the next thing inside that magazine that he'd started. He did the mail order business for music, and that really took off. And within a few years, I think it was like he started that in 73 or so, and then by 1979 he had 5 million. He had earned like 5 million pounds, so that he was off and running to other adventures and things he was getting involved in businesses. It would reach his Pluto by the age of 22. So this is kind of just the beginning. So then he would start other businesses. Okay, so let me see what else I have here on Richard. So bear with me here. Oh, I also want to take a look at his Saturn. His Saturn in Virgo relates to his, first he made mistakes with his money. He did tax evasion at first, and he had to pay for it. And that was a real hard mistake, because he basically learned from that mistake, because it cost him a little bit of jail time. I think it was very, very early on. And then after that, he was strict, running the businesses by the books. So he learned his lesson and did not make that mistake again. And but I think it came down to having to learn that and being critical on what the money was doing and how it was working, to be in integrity too. So sometimes leaders, especially in their early, before they kind of grow into their maturity, can make mistakes. What else do I have? Oh, I wanted to know why he had named the brand name Virgin. And it was interesting because when they first started that, they bought an actual brick and mortar store for the records or the albums or whatever back in 1970 to do the business and also the mail order stuff. And he said that nobody really knew what they were doing, so they said they dubbed the store Virgin because everyone involved was a complete virgin at business. And I thought that was pretty funny because the name is stuck, and he's used it ever since in his biographies and how his biographies have progressed over time. But I think what's interesting is Virgin Records, which was kind of his first big one, launched in 1973, and I think during that period of time, Jupiter is trine by his own Jupiter. So it's expanding that Pisces and through other people's resources and money. And that energy also would trine his sun. So the water energy would be expanding right when he's first launching the label or the brand. Also at the same time that the brand name Virgin was being created, Uranus was in Libra, and it was applying to a trine with Venus in the 11th and to his Neptune and Mars conjunct in Libra. So there was a lot of energy offered to Richard in his cycles here for his push once he got going. And yeah. So basically, what's interesting about his career and his growing leadership style over the years is, kind of where he kept, he was prolific in how many businesses he would open, and then taking it international. Excuse me. 1987 was quite a few new businesses. He had 8 major businesses open, including setting up the Virgin Group, expanding the brand. Excuse me, my throat. And he obtained a satellite license to broadcast 5 new channels in the UK. So 1987 was pretty huge for him. And then 88, 4 more transactions finished off the 80s for him. And then in 1997, he did the Virgin trains. And to me, I thought of Mercury because Mercury rules trains coming into play there. So the 90s were also expansive for him into international markets such as Japan, South Africa, Italy. He also launched the Virgin.net once the internet came online in 1996. And then he continued to go into other things like advancing more into publishing, more into entertainment, ticketing, cosmetics, fashion. My goodness, I had no idea he had so many businesses. Anyway, by the time the snapshot of his portfolio of wealth and what he was responsible for in his leadership, 60 Virgin companies, employs more than 71,000 people in 35 countries. It's pretty significant. So his leadership is kind of, part of it is just he has a passion for life, but another thing he said he always wanted to look, when he was looking at something, not just competitively because he wanted the space, but he felt he could do it better. And so that to me is kind of the Virgo moon coming out, like I'm looking at what they're doing and I think I can do it better, and that's why he would go into a particular business. So it's kind of somewhat competitive from that, but I think that Aries played out more for him in the adventure-seeking stuff he did as an individual, pursuing adventures and things like that, and trying to break world records. But from the business standpoint, I think he'd made some early mistakes, but over time he understood the importance of people in the business, and there's quotes on that as well. But I think if you look at the entire combination of his chart, and the nodal axis has a lot of power in it with the North Node on the Aries point, as well as Mars in trine with as the North Node ruler in trine with the South Node ruler. It's like he's bringing something that he already knew from the past experience into the present moment. And the Uranus in Cancer is the place that he's growing from. He has to kind of redo that and come back. And which is interesting because I kind of look at Uranus in Cancer as, okay, now that you make this much, you gain this much wealth and notoriety, what are you going to do with it on a bigger level? And I think he did learn, because there are some things that he has done in the humanitarian sector around almost anything. He's got quite a few things on his list of humanitarian efforts. And so maybe that is part of his evolution, and you know, what he's bringing to the whole. And not only that, his own personal identity and security, that Cancer archetype. He started the elders with several other global leaders, and that was to, you know, discuss big crises, things like climate change and diseases and things like that, as well as being on the forefront for like climate change as well. So I really think he is working on the humanitarian piece of what he does with that. And that's what I have for Richard Branson. Do you guys have any questions before I jump into the next one while I have his chart up? Any insights that you also may see that?
Yes, I was going. I find it remarkable that this conjunction of Mars and Neptune as is kind of the whole of his business, you know, like because it is in the third house, and Mars is the ruler of the midheaven, and Neptune is the ruler of the nine.
Yeah, the ninth.
It seemed that everything is related to that conjunction.
Yeah.
And the fact also that
the third house, and it's expansive ability. It's like he could go across borders and build relationships that would help him do that. So
yeah, and see, like this is in the Venus sign. So like the ruler of is South Node, and the Mars is the ruling planet for this North Node and his midheaven also. So I thought it was quite remarkable.
Yeah.
His whole business is related to that.
Yep.
I would have been curious to know about his personal relationship.
He's very private with his wife, and they live kind of isolated on an island, but they have a couple kids, and he's been with her a long time. But it's part of his life that is, it's reflected where his son is. It's very private. So, but he's still married. So.
Well, thank you. I think it's a very interesting chart.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, one last quote. I don't think I gave this one earlier, but he says, "I believe that evolution is the truth. And anyone who questions evolution, I find completely and utterly bizarre." That was like, oh, isn't that perfect for the Uranus? I love it. So he's very forward thinking, and he definitely a risk taker, but he's also a man who had to have relationships to do what he did. So even though he has such a lot of fire energy, he understands the value of the relationship. At first, I was like amazed at how many things are almost like they're operating at an optimum in his chart, right? Like sometimes I would see more challenging things, but I mean, I might think the Saturn and the Virgo in the second house would be like lean on money, but oh my gosh, no, right? It's actually how he had to learn a hard lesson first, but then how he managed after that, that's how that played out. So he had to work to move towards the integrity, but once he did, he was able to, I mean, I think if he made other poor choices related to that kind of thing, he would have never been a success like that. I mean, it could have been other problems, but I think he had to line up to have integrity to become the leader he has, and have all of those operating the way they have, if that makes any sense. So, but he was a very interesting person to study, and I'd go into a lot more detail, but I don't have as much time to, you know, do that because I wanted to go across a couple leaders, but it's kind of hard to give a lot of data on the background, but I'd like to just go right into the chart and give a little bit of background. So there's Richard. And the next person I'm going to do is, I gotta shut off the drawing. Okay, no more drawing. Stop. Okay, now I'm gonna go to the next one. We're gonna talk about Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany. It was interesting trying to find women leaders with good birth time information. So I know that Oprah has been done a lot, so I didn't want to do that one, but she does have an interesting chart. But Angela Merkel, here's kind of the stuff I'm going to go through, and then I'm going to jump to her chart. I just want to leave this up for a second for the video to have it for other people. Now, I'm not a prolific scholar on Angela Merkel, so most of the information I've gotten on her has been through Wikipedia or the online biography, and some of the people who've written on her in the media to kind of analyze her leadership. So I want to put that out there. Okay, so I'm going to go into the next one. So this is Angela Merkel. What I found interesting is that she was born in Hamburg, Germany, but they moved to Eastern Germany back then because her father was a theologian. I think he could be the priest or something, and a minister, and moved over to Eastern Germany for what he was going to do for a living when she was a young child. So they were a part of Eastern Germany, and then she is one that became interested in politics during the 1988-89 awakening. She's called an OSSI, O-S-S-I. Basically someone who became interested in the political movement that happened because of the breaking down of the walls between the two sides. So that kind of is the moment she entered politics. So there's a life event that kind of took her into politics. She started off with, basically to be a career as a quantum chemist. She has a doctorate in chemistry. So intelligent, highly intelligent, but let's go into her chart. So here is Angela Merkel's chart. So let me grab my little annotator again. Oops. No, I don't want that. I want the draw. I want that one. Okay, so what do I see in her chart? Presently, she's age 63, the Chancellor of Germany. I think she's been in power in her position for about 12 years. So she first took the position of the Christian Democratic Union on November 22nd, 2005. Just to give a little tiny detail there. So let me go into all my detail on her. So number one, what I see right out of the gate for Angela Merkel is, look at her. Mars is rising in her chart when she was born in a fire sign, though it is retrograde. And of course, I forgot to look at when that went direct, but that would be a key moment, is when Mars went direct and by progression. I just realized I didn't do that. Hello, Mercury retrograde. So Saturn in Sagittarius is rising in her chart, but look how powerful it is in a trine with Pluto in Leo from the 8th house. So it's like this undercurrent of power that's even more powerful, like that psychic power of power in the two fire signs there. So automatically, no matter which direction she takes, she's got a lot of power within her, and it would have that presence. However, which is interesting about her is, she's got North Node in the 1st house in Capricorn. So kind of the the whole life is kind of arcing towards leadership from a responsibility, duty-driven kind of traditional values perspective. And that's what she has in her leadership. She brings to the table. It's very practical in its sense, even though she's kind of like a hybrid between progressive values and yet a huge conservative base of people that she's a leader in leadership for, but also how she approaches everything. It's not always direct in where she's coming from. And when you read on her, like when she's voting on something, it's a very like practical, and she also conceals the vote sometimes till the very end. Let's see what else. Notice her. So to me, the Capricorn North Node also, the leadership would probably be really noticeable in the later part of life, especially like after the Saturn return, but she's progressed in the last, say, 12 years. So definitely in the, midlife, later life, her power comes on stronger, and her leadership quality. Now let's take a look at Saturn, because Saturn is important because it's the ruler of the North Node. And Saturn is in Scorpio. Saturn in Scorpio is like, there you go. Now, it speaks to the first career she took, which was chemistry, but it also speaks to power in that it is kind of that underneath everything, there's some power in the psychic piece, and that it has a strong approach of practicality and around resources. So, which is interesting if you think about what she's had to deal with and what's been the most challenging thing for probably from a global perspective for her, or at least in the European Union. I don't know how many Americans are fully up with Angela Merkel and what she's doing, but is the healthcare reform, but really the refugee immigration thing that she's had to deal with. And kind of it came down to her position at first in the beginning was, we can do this. I mean, it was a longer statement, but they quote as, we can do it. Many have resisted her idea about it, and even most recently it has been thought of and remarked on by her that it feels like it did not work and it failed. However, when I was thinking about it, I don't think she failed. I think it's a lot to absorb, and she opened that, and to me, she saved a lot of people from, a lot of greater suffering because they couldn't move. So I think there's something much bigger. And when I look at her whole chart, when I was just considering refugees, I look at the 7th house and all that Cancer, like the receiving, like mother for all these people. And oh goodness, it's gonna make me cry. Anyway, it's not without imperfect, it's got flaws, but a lot of people trying to escape the terror of war, the ravaged country. Goodness, this is gonna make me emotional. Anyway, she's also known as and I think the nickname Mutti, M-U-T-T-I, like the mother. She has that persona and presence. And she's also known as the decider. And then when I think that was in the G7 leadership, she's like the senior leader there. And so her reputation has like a mother tone to it, but she's like the stern mother, the strict mother, like this is how it is, don't ask questions. So she does, interesting how it comes into her politics, and very practical in her approach. And that speaks to the Saturn, which is interesting about the leadership too, because of the depth of it, because Saturn is trine all that water, but it's kind of more trine the Mercury. And look at her Mercury at 9 degrees Cancer. It's in the 7th house and it's stationing. That means it's quite powerful because of being more still in the sky. And then Jupiter in Cancer, right next to the South Node, and kind of speaks to the place of expanding, where that would be, you know, all these, with the people expanding that. But then her moon, who that rules all of that, has this huge sense of practical approach, but it's Aquarius, so there's a distance to the emotion. There's a high emotional intelligence, where she doesn't get all puffed up when she's out publicly like other leaders, and so she's more of a person, based on what I read, that would work one-on-one, and she's known for her networking one-on-one and making connections and relationships, and there's a lot of power in how she does that. So it's kind of like more of a subtle approach, but it's more personal, I think, and direct. So her moon is interesting in Aquarius. It also speaks to future-mindedness, humanitarian type, and yet, looking at her 10th house in Libra, there's kind of an air quality, a mental of her, a high intelligence being noted, her ability in the relationships being noted through that midheaven, and the moon work well together. So her reputation is known for that and is appreciated for that. So you'd think with all that Cancer, you might have someone who's super emotional, but it's often the 7th. It's how she's dealing with, it's kind of a persona from what's being projected onto her, and how she deals with it, and then how she approaches it from a practical stance. And this is kind of how her leadership style is, with a lot of power on it. She's the decider. I mean, that's her nickname. So kind of interesting. Okay, what else I got on her? Oh, I spoke about the power between the Mars and the Pluto in Leo is a power, very powerful. So anytime in transiting around that. But if you think about her sun in its position and how it would quickly enter into fire by progression, solar arc. So as she matured in age, right out of the gate around age 6 or 7, because she was born July 17th of 1954. So that would progress up, and then as she moved to age 30, kind of the Saturn return period of maturing in, that would reach her Pluto. So that would kind of like at that moment of maturity, the bloom into that power position. And I would have to add that up, because 54, that would have been about 1984. And I think that's about very close to the time that she is within graduating from her doctorate, taking on, it's starting to get involved in politics, but not really pushing towards going in, like she's an activist, but she's not pushing until the awakening a couple years later. Okay, what else did I see in here? Oh, also, her Venus is very close from a perspective without a sign, but 11 degrees from Pluto. So there's still some weight there with Pluto. In Virgo, Venus would have a practical approach to the resources as well. So it's kind of reinforced more than once here with Saturn in Scorpio, and then Venus as well. But Venus rules that Libra midheaven, and that is kind of when it's close, like I consider the 11 degrees to Pluto still being, where it has some weight with it around the power. But it's really the fire as well. Oh, it's also a new phase. Pluto with Venus. Venus is in a new phase with Pluto in her chart. And the power of Pluto, I already said, is wildly trine her ascendant. And so it's the masks she wears for the world. People have spoken after, if they've interviewed her or have caught her away from the public eye in an interview, that she can actually be even a bit more casual and super practical in her grubbies, taking hikes and notorious laugh, really loud laugh. But it's like a persona that she seems to be behind the scenes. It's not something that is out there a lot. So her persona for the public is quite polished as a leader and buttoned up and emotionally intelligent in how she approaches things. Interesting, she was Germany's first female chancellor. She was groomed in my photos by Helmut Kohl during his tenure. And let's see what else. She's also a known part of her major focus of her time has been around energy development. And if you follow Germany, you can get a sense of what they're doing with public transportation, being more progressive and things like that, for zero emissions and things like that. This is something that she's been dealing with during her chancellorship. She's currently the senior of the G7, or the G7, sorry. And one second, I'm going to bounce around here a little bit. Oh, I also got the sense that with Capricorn at 20, the Chiron in Capricorn opposite her sun and Uranus, that leadership, her leadership persona has had effects around her relationship. I know she was married twice. Well, she's married now, and it's her second husband. He's quite behind the scenes. He's a quantum chemist as well. I did not read on the divorce of the first marriage, but I would think the power that she's in is kind of somewhat of a, there's got to be a balance around how she is in the public versus how she is in her personal life and with her spouse. So because she actually has a conservative philosophy of life coming from her roots of her family that I learned. And so she's got some things that are progressive, and that shows up kind of in some of her policies, but some of them are conservative. And you can see that with her moon in Aquarius as it relates to all of the Cancer in her 7th house. Now you can see that Mercury has a lot of power in it, and it's relating to all those people as well, considerably the spouse, but all of the other people that are her constituents. I think that's the right word. But she's been in power for a long time, 12 years. And right now, as I read some of the stories, some are positive, some they're starting to wane in her popularity. So it's kind of varied in the last couple of years, last 2 years. So there seems to be a wound related to leadership as a personal identity, and it may be why she's so buttoned up and conservative in it a bit, and how she approaches her leadership style. So it's not a very Leo type of leadership style. It's more conservative. So it's interesting. I think that may be something worse that is growing from that the practical approach, the responsible one. We can do this. I mean, this is coming out in her quotes. And another quote that is that she has is, always be more than you appear, and never appear to be more than you are. And that's an amazing quote, especially considering what's in her first house, because that's about identity, right? And then the other one that I picked up that I thought was really excellent was, when it comes to human dignity, we cannot make mistakes. So there's the kind of a humanitarian and being responsible. You cannot make mistakes. So I like both those quotes. They were really excellent and kind of, you know, succinctly putting her leadership and how her philosophy is about how she approaches that. Let me see if I've got anything else. One moment. I think I've covered everything on my notes on Angela Merkel. Yeah, one last little tiny piece, one of the interviewers noted that conservative in substance, but careful to be viewed as pragmatic, and that she'd rather be deemed level-headed than anything else. Someone is on the chat. 10 minutes left. Okay, I will go to one more then. That is Angela Merkel. And my next one, let me do all these undo real quickly. Okay, oops. Okay, go on to the next one and we'll finish up with this one. Nelson Mandela. And interesting, Angela Merkel, in my review of interviews and people who comment on her leadership style, have noted that she has approach of Nelson Mandela. I didn't know that when I started this. And then also Richard Branson actually teamed up with Nelson Mandela on the project called The Elders. So they both kind of connected. Anyway, here's my little detail on Nelson Mandela. Extraordinary life. Just want to give this, I'm going to put this in the document so you can follow it along if you like in the video later. But move this so we can see. So there's a lot of information going on in his chart. So Nelson Mandela was born in a village that I can barely pronounce, and that is MVZDO. But that wasn't in solar fire, so I pulled up the closest little village, which was Elliotdale, which was like just a few minutes off on the chart, slightly like by 3 minutes. So it's pretty much this, and I just want to make note on that because I couldn't get that to be exact from the city. So born on July 18, 1918, he is born in a period when Pluto is in Cancer. And but right out of the gate, we can see he's got a powerful chart. Oops. With the nodal axis right on his ascendant descendant line. And so to me, there was something super powerful, but even more powerful was what he represented to the people, because his North Node ruler was sitting in the 7th house. So I thought, okay, this was kind of in the destiny, the plan. So looking at his North Node in Sag, the ascendant is in fire. The ruler is in Cancer, and it's sitting right next to powerful Pluto, and within about 4 degrees. So there's an incredible amount of power in relationships of self and other. And then the South Node of Gemini here is in the 6th, and yet it is so close to the descendant line and opposite the ascendant that I would say it is peering into the 7th from that 6th house. and quite powerful. And Venus is right there at 22 degrees 34 minutes. And the Venus rules his relationship to groups and associations, which he definitely had a powerful part in, which led to his life kind of situation. So just a little bit of background on Mandela. He was born in the village. His father died when he was like 9 years old, and then he was adopted by the chief that was named from his father, because his father was the former chief. I think the power was taken away from his father, and so he named the other man, another man. I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, but he was adopted by this man. So when his father died, he was adopted by this gentleman, and then he was sent to school. And so he was highly educated, and this kind of leads to where he's going to be going. In his chart, you can see the sun is in the 8th house. This speaks to the father. And also the moon is in Scorpio. And I don't learn a lot about his mother, but the only piece that I picked up from the biography is that his mother died when he was in prison, I think in 1968. But this also relates to his power with people, the symbol that he becomes for the people. He becomes the symbol for the apartheid racist movement once he's imprisoned. I mean, I have the dates on all of these activities, but basically 1927, when he was 9, is when his father died, sent off to school. By 1939, he's attending University of Fort Hare, and there he studies law. In 1940, a year later, he's an activist participating in a boycott against the university policy. So right out of the gate, he becomes a voice for what he disagrees with, which is what's going on with racism. And this is where the Mars is really active in the 11th in terms of groups and giving it voice. But it's about social justice. It's in Libra. And then going on, his first arrest was in 1956, December 5th. And he was arrested with 155 other activists that went on trial for treason, and they were acquitted in 1961. So the first one that he got arrested for, basically, was acquitted. But March 21st, 1960, just a couple years later, there was the Sharpeville massacre, and the peaceful protest was going on, and the police opened fire and killed 69 people. Mandela and other activists were forced to go underground. In 1961, the next year, Mandela founded the Umkhonto we Sizwe. I don't know if I said that right, but it's basically Spear of the Nation. That was his organization. And it was basically around the fact that they were promoting peaceful protests, but at this point after the massacre, it was like, well, maybe we need to also have a little bit more aggressive approach to it for our own dignity and being able to go head to head with this thing as a last resort. By 1962, that January, he traveled illegally to attend a conference where he was a speaker in Ethiopia, and visited also his exiled partner, Oliver Tambo, in London. When he returned, August of 1962, he was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for leaving the country illegally and inciting the worker strike of 1961. So just kind of thinking of the 60s, his country is involved in a lot of social turmoil as well as other places. He's, of course, addressing the apartheid and the racism in his own country, but also as a humanitarian globally. This is kind of his dream as well. And May 1963, he's sentenced and transferred to the Robben Island, which is a prison off of off the coast of Cape Town. And then he was brought back to Pretoria in July, because in July of 1963, the police raided the ANC, which was African National Congress. They were an organization that he was a leader of. And in that raid, they found evidence implicating Mandela and other activists who were brought to stand trial for sabotage, treason, and violent conspiracy alongside their associates. So these events, so he was an activist to begin with. It was in his thinking and what he was understood about the fairness for all men in his country when he was in university. And so that kind of was what prompted from the heart how he fought for the equal rights. It led to the activism that led to the arrest, and now he's standing trial and sent to prison, 5-year sentence. But during this time, they find more evidence, and it's not just for the activism piece and illegally leaving the country, or now it's for sabotage, treason, and violent conspiracy with some other people. So this is now, they barely made it away from the death penalty. It became just a life sentence. So now he's in life sentence. He's sent back to the major hardcore prison called Robben Island. And then as the trial begins, this is where we hear the iconic quote from his speech. This was April 20th, 1964. And he says, it basically seals his iconic status, as they say. He says, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." This is interesting when I think of his power, and by this statement and looking at his Mercury in Leo, it's like he's speaking like a man who understands the power, but also that he is acting like a king before he's a king, on a grand level. And it's kind of and in the situation, it's a dire situation. I mean, he's on trial for his life, and look, 9th house, the law, and Saturn in Leo as well. It's like he's becoming the leader, but yet at the same time, he's kind of faced with this situation as well, of the prison. And it's not easy. It's quite harsh conditions. So basically from 1964 to 1981, he's in the very difficult prison. So 27 years. So, well, actually 18 of those years were at Robben Island. Hard, very hard. So it's interesting, 18 years at Robben Island is like a whole nodal cycle. And then on June 12th, 1964, well, on June 12th, he received the life sentence, 18 years in the prison. By 1982, he's moved to Pollsmoor Prison on the mainland. And then 1988, placed under house arrest on the grounds of minimum security and correctional facility. 1989, a newly elected president, F.W. de Klerk, lifted the ban on the ANC and called for non-racist South Africa. And by February 11th, 1990, Klerk ordered Mandela's release. And so he's released. And so these are key dates, and I think they're interesting if you could look at the charts about especially the arcing of Uranus as it comes opposite his moon in opposition. And so that's very interesting. And I see winding down now. Yes, closing up. So they, once released, he was a leader, is working together with de Klerk around the negotiations with the ANC and the party in power at the time. And through those efforts, he's a Nobel Peace Prize winner in December of 1993. And He remarries in 1998, but that's when he's 80. He becomes president, but he retires from politics in 1999. So basically, he becomes president, but he's only going to take one term. So you can see how he became this iconic leader for the people, and over time. So he had to work to stay physically fit while he was incarcerated, as well as he wrote a lot on his biography, Long Road to Freedom. And so you can see how his power plays out in his chart. Let me just double check any last things here. His Uranus in Aquarius also speaks about the ideal for equality in Aquarian for the people, and his experience of it as being in conjunct his sun. So the discord related to that, of his own personal experience. His sun in Cancer will progress towards his midheaven and so forth. And basically, I think that's in a nutshell. There's probably a lot more in there, but we were running out of time. So do you have any questions on Nelson's chart or anything else you see from our sharing?
Okay, Sarah. Thank you so much. Looks like that's the end of your meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you from all of us. We'll see you next time.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was so interesting.
Thank you. That was great.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone.
Sarah.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.